Founder-owner orders. Steak, waitress, secretly slips him a note that stops him cold. Do you really think you can walk in here and get away with it? Marcus Hayes stared down the grimy pavement as the summer heat rippled off the asphalt, then looked up at the faded sign of Hayes's Chop House without flinching. It was a slow Tuesday afternoon in rural Mississippi, the kind of heat that made even the clocks tick feel heavy. He'd parked his battered pickup in front of a dingy strip mall, its storefronts peeling and its parking lot cracked, but something about this place felt deeply familiar. Not because he'd been here before he hadn't, but because the smell of grease and stale coffee matched memories buried under years of burned-out stoves and unpaid bills. He walked in wearing a worn leather jacket, jeans scuffed at the knees, a faded ball cap shadowing his eyes. He carried himself like a man who'd once owned the room, but learned early how to hide his power. The hostess barely glanced up, eyes glued to her tablet. "Table for one," he said, voice low. She typed something, nodded, and waved him toward a booth by the front window. "Table 7, he noted. A small symbol, but it felt like a compass. This was where he'd made his first steak gargantuan back when he was head chef of the original Chop House in New Orleans. He slid into the vinyl seat and let his hands rest on the table fingertips, tracing invisible cracks. His gaze swept the dining room, a lanky young man in a tight polo lurking by the bar, arms crossed. A half-dozen cooks, hunched behind swinging doors, their faces masks of exhaustion. The place was dying. He already knew the ribs here were overcooked, the collard greens lukewarm, and the numbers bled red across his company's ledgers. But he hadn't come for a good meal. He was undercover, the founder coming back in disguise, determined to see the rot for himself. As he flipped open the menu, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced down, no caller ID, and ignored it. A waitress drifted over mid-20s, hair tied back carelessly, eyes cautious. "Afternoon," she said. "I'm Ivy. I'll be with you today." Her voice was soft, but there was steel behind it. "What do folks order here?" Marcus asked, closing the menu with a deliberate snap. Ivy's eyes narrowed as if she could smell his secret. The ribeyes, solid medium, rare with garlic mashed potatoes and sautéed kale. She didn't smile. She was too tired for that. "I'll take it," he said. Her nod was almost imperceptible, and she retreated to the kitchen. Marcus leaned back, his mind replaying that night 6 years ago in Tulsa, when a choking customer's life hung in the balance, and Ivy, then a terrified line cook, had looked to him for guidance. He'd given her a $100 tip and a pep talk about initiative. Now he was the one hungry for answers. A sizzling plate arrived faster than expected, meat perfectly pink in the middle, aroma bold enough to tug at old pride. But the moment he bit into the steak, he tasted something bitter beneath the seasoning fear. A folded receipt lay next to his coffee mug. He waited until Ivy turned away, and then unfolded it. 6 words scrawled in careful script. "If you're really who I think you are, don't leave." His pulse didn't race. He'd faced down flames and bankruptcy, but his chest tightened anyway. In the reflection of the glass, he saw Ivy watching him from across the room, eyes pleading. That simple note confirmed the truth he'd come to uncover. This wasn't just bad management or slow service. It was something deeper, something that metastasized in silence and fear. He pressed the tiny slip of paper into his palm, feeling its weight like a secret pact. Outside, the sun dipped lower, the shadows of the strip mall stretching long. He finished his coffee and left a few crumpled bills on the table, then rose. Instead of heading to the exit, he turned toward the employees-only door. On the other side, power and intimidation hid behind clipped smiles and clipped hours. Marcus Hayes was about to bring both crashing down, but first he needed to find Ivy and find the courage to face what lay beyond those swinging doors. "Don't step another inch," barked the manager's voice, before Marcus could even clear the employees-only sign. He froze, heart thumping, not from fear, but from the electric rush of being caught. Todd Granger stood in the narrow hallway, arms crossed over his too-tight polo clipboard clutched like a weapon. Marcus didn't flinch. He met Todd's glare with the same calm intensity he'd learned as a chef, facing a roaring grill. "I'm not here for tips or schedules," Marcus said evenly, voice a low rumble. "I need a word with Ivy." Todd's brow furrowed. "This is off limits. You're a customer, buddy. You get your complaint at the front desk." Marcus let the words land like a dropped pan. He glanced past Todd to the dim back corridor where the mop bucket sat propping open a door that led deeper into the shadows. "I prefer talking here," he replied. Todd took a step forward. His cheap cologne barely masked the tension in his shoulders. "You got complaints, bring 'em up proper," he snarled. Marcus held his ground, the hallway's harsh fluorescent lights flickering overhead as though echoing the crack in the restaurant's facade. Then he leaned in, voice dropping so only Todd could hear. "My complaint is that people are terrified, and I'm not just any customer." Todd's eyes narrowed. Something clicked. Marcus saw the shift like a hinge finally groaning open. "You're nobody," Todd spat, but Marcus noticed the hesitation, the silent question in his pupils. That was all he needed. Without another word, Marcus pivoted and slipped past Todd into the storage closet at the far end. The door clicked shut, sealing them off from the forced smiles and low hum of the dining room. There, Ivy Washington was hunched over a crate of lemons, her hands trembling slightly as she wiped away sticky residue. Her eyes widened in shock, then hardened with urgency when she saw Marcus. He shut the door. The stale air smelled of bleach and fryer oil, a scent that used to comfort him in his own kitchens, now tainted with broken promises. "You came," Ivy whispered, voice barely more than a breath. "I knew you would," Marcus replied softly, pulling the 6-word note from his pocket and unfolding it again. Ivy bit her lip, glancing toward the door. Marcus pressed the note into her hand. "Tell me everything." She exhaled, the sound caught somewhere between relief and dread. "Todd's been siphoning inventory, pocketing cash-cutting shifts," she said, voice trembling on each word. "He clocks us out early so payroll never notices. I've seen orders vanish, steak deliveries that never arrived, liquor counts that never match." "People are scared, Marcus." He watched her, the fluorescent bulb overhead casting sharp shadows on her determined face. "Why risk yourself for a stranger?" he asked. Ivy's jaw tightened. "You saved me once," she said, voice cracking. "When I first started, you didn't have to tip that customer. You gave me hope." Marcus closed his eyes, the memory of that night flooding him, the choking man, the chaos, and Ivy's terrified glance. He'd taught her that courage was contagious. Now it was her turn. He leaned forward, voice steady. "I'll expose it all, but not just Todd." Ivy's brow shot up. "Who else?" she swallowed. "Ethan Caldwell," she whispered. "Todd's uncle. He's been covering for him from the top." Marcus felt a cold knot in his stomach. The twist ran deeper than he imagined, family ties, a system rigged to protect itself. He slipped the note back into his pocket and stood. "Then we go bigger." Ivy nodded, resolve flickering in her dark eyes. The hallway was silent, but for the distant clatter of dishes and the soft buzz of the exit sign. They shared a glance that said everything from here on, nothing could be the same. And as Marcus stepped out of the closet, the weight of that truth settled in his bones, propelling him toward a reckoning that would break or remake every chain in his path. "You really think you can break into your own restaurant and come out clean?" Ivy's whispered question cut through the darkness as Marcus Hayes adjusted the strap of his battered leather backpack. He slipped through the back door at exactly 11:02 p.m., the heavy thud of the latch echoing like a gunshot in the empty alley. The night air was thick with the stench of yesterday's fryer oil and wet asphalt, a perfume that once smelled like hard work and midnight shifts. Tonight it tasted like risk. Marcus's pulse hammered in his ears, not from fear of getting caught, but from the weight of his own history. He'd started this chain with nothing but a suitcase full of dreams and a chef's knife strapped to his belt. That knife had carved steaks for grateful customers. Now it sat sheathed at his hip, a silent reminder that sometimes you had to cut away the rot to save the heart of something you loved. He followed Ivy's footsteps through the dimly lit corridor, her silhouette darting ahead under a flickering security lamp. Somewhere the whir of a freezer fan hummed like a restless ghost. They reached the locker room door. Marcus's hand found the small silver key Ivy had slipped him earlier, smooth metal that said more than words ever could. He swallowed, recalling the moment 6 years ago when he'd looked into her terrified eyes during a kitchen rush and told her courage was contagious. Now it was her turn to be the spark, and he was her torchbearer. He slid the key into the lock, and with a soft click, the door swung inward. Inside, lockers loomed like silent witnesses to every cut corner and stolen hour. Marcus moved straight to Todd Granger's locker. BL dented the initials, a careless stamp of power. Ivy held the flashlight, her hand trembling so violently that the beam danced across the concrete floor. He unlatched the door and yanked it open. The contents tumbled out: a greasy gym bag, a bottle of designer cologne, and buried beneath torn mesh jerseys the black duffel Ivy had described. Marcus crouched, eyes trained on the bag's zipper. This was the moment truth met the light. He unzipped the duffel, and the first thing he saw was a burner phone. Not just any phone, but the kind with no name, no registration, no trace. Next to it lay tidy stacks of crumpled bills bound in rubber bands, denominations small enough to slip unnoticed through the register. His jaw clenched. This was the evidence that would shatter the system. But then something caught the corner of his eye, a faded photograph taped to the inside of the locker door. It showed Todd and Ethan Caldwell, uncle and nephew, smiling in identical chef coats, arms slung over each other's shoulders. The twist was deeper than he'd imagined. This wasn't just a rogue manager stealing from the till. It was a family conspiracy, a network of power shielding itself with blood ties. Marcus felt the old ache of betrayal surge through his chest. He'd built this business to lift people up, not to see it corrupted by nepotism and fear. Ivy's breath hitched behind him. "What if they catch me with this?" she whispered. Marcus straightened the weight of the photo in his hand. "Then we drive the point home," he said, voice quiet but steel-lined. He snapped pictures of every screen, every rubber-banded stack, and then, despite the urge to flood the world with his discovery, he paused. In that flickering locker room, among echoes of broken dreams and stolen paychecks, he realized the fight wasn't just about exposing Todd. It was about dismantling a system that protected its own at the expense of everyone else. He slipped the evidence into his bag and turned toward the door. But as he reached for the handle, the distant creak of the manager's office door sounded a soft, deliberate groan that froze him mid-step. Ivy's flashlight wavered, and for a heartbeat, all he heard was his own breath. Then footsteps, slow measured, approaching. The hallway stretched behind him, empty and treacherous. Marcus gripped the strap of his backpack, heart pounding, and took a single step forward into the darkness that would decide everything. "Hands where I can see them," snarled Todd Granger as the office door slammed shut behind Marcus. The cheap lock rattled like a brittle promise as the fluorescent light hummed overhead, casting a sickly glow on the cluttered desk. Marcus froze, the weight of the black duffel strapped at his side, the burner phone and cash burning holes through his resolve. Todd's paddle-shaped clipboard hovered like a judge's gavel, ready to condemn or protect. Every muscle in Marcus's body tensed. This moment was the fulcrum between justice and disaster. "You broke into my locker," Todd's spat voice coated with equal parts anger and fear. "You think you own this place?" Marcus met his gaze, calm as the eye of a storm. "I built it," he replied, voice low but unwavering. "And I'm taking it back." Todd laughed, a brittle sound that echoed off the walls. "You tricked me," he accused. "Pretended to be Joe Customer just to pull this stunt." Marcus let the words land, studying Todd's face for cracks. "I didn't pretend," he said. "I came as I was someone who cares." He lowered his hand and flipped open the duffel on the desk. The stacks of cash rolled out like evidence of betrayal, the burner phone's cracked screen glinting under the harsh light. Todd's eyes flicked between the piles, and Marcus' realization dawning like a funeral bell. Where did you get that?" Marcus leaned forward, heart pounding. "I got it from your locker, right next to your family photo." He held up the faded snapshot of Todd and Ethan Caldwell smiling in matching chef coats, as though they were partners in a legacy. But this isn't legacy. It's nepotism turned toxic. Todd's face, hardened veins throbbing at his temples. "This is business," he snarled. "Family sticks together." Marcus shook his head. "Not when family is stealing from the people who keep this place alive." The silence that followed felt eternal. Marcus could almost hear the hum of the fryer in the kitchen, the anxious whispers of cooks and servers outside, the way fear had drowned out hope. He pressed on. "You cut shifts, stole tips, reneged on orders. You turned this kitchen into a playground for your greed." Todd's shoulders slumped, but his eyes still burned with defiance. "You're bluffing," he growled. "You don't have proof." Marcus smiled, slow and cold. He pulled the burner phone from his pocket and tapped the screen. The camera app opened to images, text chains from vendors, photos of missing invoices, voice notes of Ivy recording Todd admitting to manipulating schedules. Todd's jaw clenched. "You recorded me," he whispered. "I trusted you." Marcus's chest tightened. "Trust is earned, and you squandered yours." He rose stride unshakable and laid the evidence in a neat stack on Todd's desk, the duffel's cash, the phone, the printed logs. "I gave you a chance to stop this," he said. "But silence was your weapon." Todd's gaze dropped to the floor. The symbol of the duffel's bulging sides and the burner phone's cracked face was more damning than any words. Marcus's inner voice roared this was the moment to break the cycle. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a single silver key, the one that had unlocked Todd's world. Without a flicker of hesitation, he tossed it on the desk. "Your time's up," he declared. Todd looked at the key, then at Marcus' confusion and fear warring in his eyes. "What now?" Todd rasped. Marcus turned toward the door. "Now we bring in the uncle." As the footsteps of the past threatened to drown out the future, Marcus stepped out of the office, leaving Todd to confront the unraveling of his empire and the storm that was about to descend on Ethan Caldwell's doorstep. "You think a few photos and a duffel bag full of cash are enough to topple an empire?" Ethan Caldwell's voice crackled through Marcus's phone speaker cool, and practiced as if he'd been expecting the call. Marcus stood in the dim lobby of the rundown motel he'd checked into hours ago, the peeling wallpaper and flickering fluorescent bulb overhead a mocking echo of the restaurant's own decay. He tightened his grip on the key Ivy had given him, the silver weight a reminder that power can fit in your pocket if you have the courage to carry it. "It's a start," Marcus replied evenly, pressing the phone to his ear. "Your nephew's been stealing from the people you claim to protect. I'm offering you a choice: come clean or watch every branch of Hayes's chop house crumble under the weight of your secrets." There was a pause, heavy enough to taste. Outside, the night settled into a hush, broken only by distant traffic and the low hum of the motel's ancient air conditioner. Marcus's jaw set. He remembered the day he first cut into steak as a young chef, hands steady, eyes focused, believing that honest labor could feed families and build community. Now that belief was on trial. "You're a fool if you think I'll roll over," Ethan finally spat. "I did what I had to do to keep this chain alive. Labor's expensive. People don't stay. My choices kept us afloat." Marcus's pulse kicked not with anger, but a calm fire that warmed his chest. "At the expense of your own people," he said quietly. "Single mothers losing shifts, cooks scraping by honest staff left hungry, so you could pad your ledger. That's not leadership. That's exploitation." Ethan laughed a sound as hollow as broken promises. "You can't threaten me. I've got lawyers, board members, and a reputation that'll bury you." Marcus closed his eyes, picturing Monica Rivera poring over the leases and vendor contracts, her pen poised above the paper like a scalpel ready to cut away falsehoods. She'd warned him this would get ugly, but ugly was better than silent complicity. He drew a slow breath. Let them try. I've already shared everything with Monica. You've got 1 hour to surrender your position and drop these charges, or I go public with everything. Ethan's voice turned colder, brittle. You'll regret this. Marcus didn't flinch. He slipped the phone into his jacket pocket and pulled out his chef's knife-worn handle razor edge, resting it flat on the motel desk. The gleam of steel under the tired bulb was a promise no matter how deep the rot, he'd cut it out. Outside, the neon sign buzzed and sputtered like a dying heart. Marcus picked up the knife chest tight with resolve and fear, and waited for the fallout, knowing that once you draw blood in the name of justice, you can't walk away the same. They called me crazy this morning, Marcus murmured into his phone as dawn's pale light slanted through the motel blinds. But crazy built this place from the ground up. By 8:00 a.m., the story was already breaking. Undercover founder exposes theft at Hayes' Chop House. Monica Rivera had circulated the sealed evidence to local outlets, and interns from the town's only daily paper were calling non-stop. Marcus pressed his palm against the chipped Formica tabletop, the cool surface grounding him. Outside, a broken neon motel sign buzzed unevenly, a symbol of everything he aimed to fix. He pulled on his leather jacket over the same faded t-shirt he'd worn days ago, the one with a grease stain from his old kitchen. It smelled like home, and reminded him why he was here. He left the room heading straight for the diner where he and Ivy would meet Ken Holland, now promoted to investigative intern, outside the glow of the restaurant's neon chop logo. The diner smelled of burnt toast and ambition. Ken, young and eager, slid into a vinyl booth across from him, laptop open, recorder ready. Ivy sat beside Marcus, arms crossed over her apron, the weight of last night's choices in her eyes. Tell me again about those shifts, Ken said, voice soft but insistent. Marcus leaned forward, muscles coiled with purpose. Todd cut hours so he could pocket cash. Monica's got the logs. I want this on record: a single mother working 2 tables for everyone she gets paid. Ivy nodded, pulling her phone from her pocket to play a hushed voice note of Todd bragging about reneging on payroll. The diner's waitress refilled their coffee cups without comment, the chipped ceramic mugs a reminder that broken things can still serve a purpose. Ken's fingers flew over the keyboard, crafting a narrative that placed faces and names on abstract corruption. The quiet hum of the diner's fluorescent lights felt like the pulse of accountability, steady, relentless. After 2 hours, they stood outside the headline, ready to print. Marcus's heart pounded. He remembered the first time he carpooled to a protest for fair wages, the anger in his chest like diesel fueling his steps. Today he wasn't protesting, he was empowering. The article hit the web at noon, screenshots of burner phone texts from vendors, photos of rubber-banded bills, Ivy's testimonial, and a quote from Monica pledging legal action. Within minutes, staff from other Chop House locations were emailing. Thank you for giving me a voice. I've got receipts from Memphis. My cousin in Atlanta had the same problem. The inbox flooded with confessions and gratitude, proof that the rot was everywhere, not just in Mississippi. Ivy's eyes flicked to the motel's window and back to Marcus. They're listening, she whispered. Marcus exhaled the air, tasting like resolve. This is bigger than us, he said. It's a movement. But even as they celebrated this small victory, a text lit up his phone. They've filed a restraining order. You need to leave. The glow of the screen felt cold. Marcus looked at Ivy and Ken, his allies, in a war that was just beginning. The broken neon sign outside buzzed again. Challenging him, would he step back into the light or retreat? Are you ready to rewrite history? The CEO's question landed like ice in the sunlit dining room, where Marcus Hayes sat at table 7, the very booth where it all began. He looked up from the envelope of legal briefs and staff testimonials, his reflection ghosted in the window behind the polished mahogany table. Across from him, a tall, gray-haired executive in a crisp navy suit sent by the board smiled politely, but his eyes betrayed the uncertainty that rippled through corporate channels. All around them, the restaurant was closed for cleaning. Jaden the dishwasher humming an old blues tune as he polished silverware in the back. The clink of metal on metal echoed like a heartbeat, reminding Marcus that even the smallest sounds could shift the balance of power. Marcus inhaled, summoning the calm he'd forged over years of crisis and kitchen fires. "I'm not here to relitigate the past," he said, voice steady. "I'm here to build our future." He slid the GM offer letter across the table to Ivy Washington, now general manager of the Fort Smith location, her name embossed in gold on the crisp cardstock. Ivy's hands trembled as she picked it up, her eyes flicking from the paper to Marcus and back again. It was more than a title. It was a symbol of what could happen when courage met accountability. The CEO cleared his throat. "We've reviewed the coverage, the legal findings. Glenn Caldwell has been terminated, Todd Granger's actions were indefensible, and the board is prepared to implement your recommended policy changes. But we need your formal commitment." Marcus leaned back. The afternoon sun slanted through the window, casting stripes of light on the floor like prison bars breaking apart. "I'll come back on one condition," he said. "We extend back pay to every hourly employee who lost shifts. We institute anonymous reporting lines at every location, and health benefits start here at Fort Smith by next month." The CEO hesitated. This was a tall ask, even for a founder. But in the envelope beside Marcus lay months of staff emails, stories of missed rent payments, skipped meals, silent tears in the walk-in cooler. This wasn't charity. It was justice. "And what about your own position?" the CEO asked, voice a notch softer. Marcus met his gaze, unwavering. "My name remains on the lease, but I'm not interested in the title founder anymore. I want to be the catalyst for fairness, the person who listens when others whisper." A long silence followed, filled only by the distant hum of the exhaust fans. Then the CEO nodded slowly but firmly and reached across the table to shake Marcus's hand. The grip was neither triumphant nor reluctant. It was a promise. Outside the window, Ivy stood beside Jaden, watching the exchange. When Marcus stepped out of the booth, she approached him, clutching the GM letter as though it were a lifeline. "You did it!" she whispered, relief and wonder warring in her voice. Marcus smiled faintly, the tension in his shoulders loosening for the first time in days. "We did it," he corrected gently. The restaurant's lights still glowed faintly, reflecting off the newly polished silverware, like tiny stars in a midnight sky. But as Marcus and Ivy walked through the dining room together past empty tables, waiting for tomorrow's service, a new question hung in the air. Could this fragile truce withstand the challenges ahead? The fight against greed and fear was won in private rooms and newspaper headlines, but the true test would come when the doors reopened, when staff and customers returned, and when the real work of rebuilding trust began. And as the front door swung shut behind them, the echo of that question followed. Was this just the end of one battle, or the beginning of a movement that would transform every corner of Hayes's chop house? You think the fight ends when the doors open? Think again. Marcus Hayes stood alone in the pre-dawn stillness of Hayes's chop house, the scent of fresh-baked rolls mingling with the antiseptic smell of new policy manuals. He watched Ivy Washington flip the sign to open her reflection, ghosting across the glass door. Today wasn't just another service shift. It was the real test of everything they'd fought for. Would staff trust the promise of fairness? Would customers sense something deeper than a quality steak? Marcus inhaled the crisp morning air. His leather jacket felt heavier now, a mantle of responsibility rather than a shield. He remembered the battered neon motel sign, the echoes of clinking silverware, and the handwritten note Ivy had slipped him on day one. That 6-word plea had set everything in motion. Now he'd face an even tougher audience, the everyday workers whose whispered complaints he'd elevated the boardroom full of skeptical executives and the wider community hungry for accountability. The roast of injustice was laid bare, but could it bake genuine change? The front door swung open, and Jaden, the teenager who once cleaned plates, silently stepped in first. He paused, looked up at Marcus, and nodded. A simple gesture, but it spoke volumes, a young man reclaiming dignity. Behind him came servers, cooks, and dishwashers, each face a living ledger of sacrifice. As Marcus watched them file in, he spotted Monica Rivera standing by the host stand, bright-eyed and determined. Her stacks of benefits packets and anonymous report pamphlets were no longer symbols of paperwork. They were lifelines. Ivy emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She caught Marcus's eye and offered a small, confident smile. It was the same look she'd worn the night they met in that cramped storage closet, fear clashing with courage. Now it was pure resolve. Marcus stepped forward, voice low but carrying. "Thank you for believing," he said. He paused, letting the words settle. "Today we're not just cooking meals, we're building trust." Behind them, the grill sizzled to life, the sound a heartbeat, a reminder that every flame could forge hope or burn bridges. Marcus walked to a booth near the window, the ghost of Table 7 looming under the morning light. He placed his worn chef's knife on the table, no longer a weapon, but a reminder of hands that shape more than food, hands that carve change. Servers passed with trays of steaming steaks and fresh salads, each plate a testament to fair pay and respect. Customers murmured surprise at the renewed energy, the palpable sense that something changed inside these walls. A child's laughter drifted from a family table, echoing the possibility that businesses can nurture communities, not just profiteer off them. As the lunch rush built, Marcus lingered by the pass, watching his team move with newfound pride. The fight wasn't over social justice, and honest leadership demanded constant vigilance. But in their steady steps, he saw the story's next chapter. One where courage sparked a movement, integrity became the standard, and every employee's voice mattered. He turned back to Ivy, eyes shining. "Ready for the next day?" he asked quietly. She nodded firm. Outside, the strip mall basked in midday sun cracks in the asphalt, like scars healing over. Marcus inhaled again, heart full. The doors were open and the world was watching, because this was never just a restaurant. It was proof that real change begins where fear ends, and people stand together one honest meal at a time.